Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we're sharing a powerful and emotional journey about a young woman named Sophia, who learned the hardest lesson about family, betrayal, and self-worth when she went into labor. Her parents chose to ignore her and focus on her brother's engagement party, leaving her to give birth alone. This event sparked a series of life-changing decisions that would reshape her future. Through a bitter legal battle, she found her own strength and took control of her life. Join us as we dive into this extraordinary story of resilience and empowerment. Don't forget to subscribe to start today's story. My name is Sophia, and I've learned the hard way that sometimes family isn't as it's cracked up to be. It wasn't always like this. I used to think that the love between family members was unconditional, that no matter what, you could count on them. But what I've come to understand is that love, in some families, can be a one-sided affair. And that's the hardest pill to swallow. I was 21 when I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned, not at all, and the father disappeared the moment he knew. I was left to face the unknown on my own. I won't lie, there were nights when fear kept me up, questioning whether I was ready to raise a child without a father by my side. But as time passed, I realized that this wasn't about him anymore. It was about me and the life I was going to bring into the world. It's strange, isn't it? The moment you become responsible for someone else's life, you suddenly grow up in ways you never thought possible. I thought, with all the emotional upheaval I was going through, maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally see me. I wasn't just their daughter who faded into the background. This time, I had something to show for myself. I had this little life growing inside of me. And surely, they would rally behind me now. I was wrong. At the same time I was preparing for my due date, my younger brother Ethan, the golden child, was getting engaged. My parents were ecstatic. They threw him a massive engagement party. One of those affairs where everything is overly expensive, the kind with catered meals, live music, and guests who had a list of demands. Meanwhile, I was shuffling around in the background, my swollen belly ignored, as my parents poured all their attention on Ethan and his future bride. It was the night of Ethan's engagement party when things went south for me. I'd been feeling a little off, but I figured it was just part of the process. It wasn't until the pain hit that I realized something was wrong. Fast, my water broke, and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hardly breathe. I pulled out my phone and called my mom, knowing she was busy at the party. I was trying to keep it together as I said, "Mom, it's happening. I need to go to the hospital." There was a long pause. I could hear the clinking of glasses and the murmur of voices in the background. When she finally spoke, her voice was as casual as ever. "We're really busy right now. Sophia, can't you figure it out?" My heart dropped into my stomach. What? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Figure it out. Call an Uber or something. We'll talk later. And just like that, she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the wall, feeling like I had been struck by lightning. My own mother, my own flesh and blood, had abandoned me in the most vulnerable moment of my life. I was about to become a mother, and she couldn't even give me the decency to help me get to the hospital. In that moment, I realized something that I had been trying to deny for years. My parents had never truly seen me. I was just an afterthought. Something that wasn't as important as Ethan's happiness. His engagement, his life, his dreams, they were the center of their world. And I was just the backdrop. I would always be the backdrop. I managed to call an Uber. My body racked with pain with every passing second. The driver gave me nervous glances in the rearview mirror as I tried to control my breathing, trying not to scream. I barely made it to the hospital in time. And when I did, it was just me. There was no mother holding my hand, no father pacing the hallway. There was no family waiting to celebrate the arrival of my child. It was just me and the baby. I gave birth alone, and when I looked at my daughter, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I made a decision to never let myself be that vulnerable again. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my parents, make me feel like I didn't matter. I wasn't going to let anyone control me. especially when it came to the love I had for my own child. The next day, I blocked their numbers. I didn't want to hear from them. Didn't want them in my life. And when they tried to reach out, I ignored them. I refused to let them come visit. I needed space. I needed peace. And I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. 3 months later, my mother called in a panic. "Why is the bank freezing our account?" she asked. And with a smile that I had never been able to muster in their presence, I simply said, "Ask your favorite child." I hung up the phone. The satisfaction coursing through me. It was time for me to start living on my own terms. To finally step out of the shadow of my parents and take control of my own life. For years, I had been giving and giving, always hoping that my parents would one day see me, not just as the girl in the background, but as someone who deserved their attention, their love, their support. I'd spent so much of my life trying to make them proud, trying to prove that I mattered. But the more I tried, the more I realized that nothing would ever be enough. They'd always had their golden boy, Ethan. Everything he did was wonderful. Every step he took was celebrated, while I was left to navigate life on my own. But it wasn't just about being ignored. It was about betrayal. I had spent years under the false illusion that my parents were watching out for me, that they had my best interests at heart. But when I gave birth alone, it shattered that illusion once and for all. What made it worse was that they had no idea how much their neglect hurt me. They never once considered how lonely I must have felt, how scared I was. They never stopped to think about how, when I needed them most, they left me to figure it out on my own. That was the moment when I realized that love, for them, had always been conditional. The phone call with my mother about the frozen account was just the beginning. I had been waiting for the right moment to sever ties with them completely. And this felt like the perfect opportunity. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life, my future, and my peace. The money they had been taking from me for years wasn't just a result of mismanagement or oversight, it was intentional theft. My trust fund had been set up by my grandparents. And though it wasn't an enormous sum, it was mine. It was supposed to be mine when I turned 22. A financial cushion to help me create the life I wanted. But instead, my parents had been treating it like their personal piggy bank. I had always known they were taking money from it, but I had no idea the extent of it. They'd used it for everything, from lavish parties for Ethan to supporting their lifestyle. What stung the most was how they'd never even asked me. They took without permission, like I was some endless resource they were entitled to. I was done. I'd had enough. And I wasn't just going to walk away from the situation quietly. I had no idea how. But I knew I was going to fight. I hired a lawyer and, with the help of some of the financial records I had been keeping, I cut them off. When I turned 22, I took control of my trust fund. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about taking my power back. I didn't want them to have access to a single cent of it. They had used it to support their own agendas for too long. I don't think they ever truly understood what losing that money meant for them. Sure, they were upset when they realized that they couldn't touch it anymore. But what really hurt them wasn't the financial loss. It was the realization that I no longer cared about them. That's when the calls started coming in, frantic and full of desperation. My mother, in particular, was beside herself. "Why is the bank freezing our account?" she asked. Her voice high-pitched, almost frantic. I wanted to laugh, but instead, I just smiled softly and said, "Ask your favorite child." It was the first time in my life I felt like I was in control of the situation. The moment felt like a victory, not because I had hurt them, but because I had finally taken ownership of my life. My money was mine to do with as I pleased. And no one, not even my parents, could take that away from me anymore. But that victory was just the beginning. I knew that the real battle was yet to come. I didn't know how far they'd go. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Not after everything. It wasn't long before the situation escalated. I thought I had prepared myself for the worst. But nothing could have prepared me for the emotional storm that was about to hit. After I had cut my parents off financially, I expected them to be upset. But I never imagined they would go this far. The days after I'd taken control of my trust fund were eerily quiet. I waited for the flood of texts and phone calls, the guilt trips and pleas for forgiveness. But nothing came. I figured maybe they were too embarrassed to reach out. Maybe they were reflecting on what had happened, realizing how wrong they'd been. But then, a few days later, the situation took a turn I hadn't anticipated. I opened the door to grab a package from the front step and found my mother standing there. Her appearance immediately struck me. She looked nothing like the woman I had grown up seeing. Her hair was unkempt, no makeup, and deep stress lines etched her forehead. She didn't even greet me. Instead, she pushed past me without a word and walked straight into my apartment as if she owned the place. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Don't pretend like you don't know," she snapped, turning to face me. Her face was twisted with fury. "You froze our money. You did this to us." I was stunned. This was the same woman who had refused to help me when I was in labor. The woman who had chosen her son's engagement party over me in the most crucial moment of my life. And now she was standing in front of me, accusing me of betraying the family? My blood boiled. I laughed. I said, my voice cold, "Actually," I laughed. "You really think this is about you? About your bills? Your responsibilities? No, Mom. This is about my money. My money. The money you weren't supposed to touch in the first place." She scoffed, clearly not ready to face the truth. "You have no idea what you've done. Sophia, your father and I, we've worked so hard. We've given everything for you. For this family. You gave everything for Ethan." I cut in, not letting her finish. "Let's be real here, Mom. You didn't care about me. You cared about him, about his party, about his wedding. You didn't care that I was giving birth alone, that I was struggling to keep it together. No, you were too busy to even notice." Her face turned pale, but she quickly recovered. "You're being unreasonable. We're family. You don't just cut us off. You don't just throw us away because of some misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "No, Mom. You don't get to make this about a misunderstanding. You left me to give birth alone. You made me feel like I didn't matter. And now you're acting like none of that happened?" She narrowed her eyes, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "You don't know what you've just started." Before I could respond, she turned and walked out. But her words lingered in the air, a warning I didn't yet understand. I was about to learn that the battle I had started was far from over. 3 days later, I received a lawsuit. My parents had filed against me, claiming that they had been using the trust fund for family expenses and that I had no right to take it away from them. And, of course, there was Ethan, my ever-loyal brother, standing right there with them, arguing that I owed them for everything they had done for me, including raising me as a child. I was shocked. This was their way of retaliating? I had been ignored, left alone to fend for myself. And now they were trying to paint me as the villain? But what hurt the most wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was the fact that Ethan, my brother, the one person I thought I could rely on, was in on this. He was siding with them, defending their theft of my money. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt numb. They had all gone too far. They had crossed a line that I could never uncross. I was done trying to keep the peace. Done pretending like we were a family who cared for each other. I called my lawyer immediately. We were going to fight this, no matter what it took. The truth was on my side. And I wasn't about to let them destroy me over a few years of stolen money. I had receipts. I had proof. And now I had the resolve to see this through. If they wanted a war, they were about to get one. But as the legal battle began to unfold, I quickly learned that the fight was going to be more complicated than I ever expected. The lies were just beginning to unravel. As the lawsuit continued, my world seemed to become even more surreal. What started as a fight for my own dignity and financial independence quickly turned into a battle I never imagined I'd face. My parents, once the people I looked up to, were now the people I had to defend myself against. I realized, over time, that this wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the years of hurt, betrayal, and manipulation that had been building up silently in the background. Eventually, the legal fight took its toll on them. They realized they couldn't win, especially after the fraud charges were brought against them. When my mother finally came to terms with the situation, there was no apology, just a bitter acknowledgement that things had gone too far. The damages were paid back, but the emotional scars would never heal. I never fully forgave them. I couldn't, but I also couldn't stay stuck in the past. My daughter grew up with love, respect, and the strength of knowing that her mother wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. I built my life again, this time without the constant need for validation from a family that never truly saw me. And so, I walked away. I had fought for my future, for my peace, and for my right to live my life on my own terms. The family I once dreamed of never came to be, but what I found instead was a much stronger, more resilient version of myself. In the end, that's the story I tell my daughter, the story of standing up for yourself, even when it feels like the world is against you. If you enjoyed this life story, don't forget to subscribe for more heart-wrenching and powerful stories. Thank you for watching.